I rode into Ashridge at the edge of morning, the sun just starting to crawl up behind the low hills. The road was packed with dust and silence. The kind that settles over a town that's already made up its mind about you. I wore Micah's coat. It was too big across the shoulders, sleeves near to my knuckles, the collar frayed where he used to turn it up against the wind. It still smelled like smoke and horse leather. I hadn't washed it since the night they found his body stiff and frozen half a mile from the cabin, axe still clutched in his hand. That coat had outlived the man. The weight of the deed sat like a stone in my pocket. I must have checked it 12 times along the trail, folded and signed by a land agent who didn't care where I was from, what my blood was, or whose name I carried. Just lines and ink and ownership, but Ashridge wasn't built on ink. It was built on memory, the kind that turns mean when it's been sitting too long in the sun. As I rode through the heart of town, I felt eyes before I saw faces. The blacksmith paused mid-swing. A woman at the pump stilled her hand on the handle. Kids hushed each other near the church steps. Their stares didn't burn. They froze. Like I was something dead that had come back wrong. The chapel loomed on the right, all white paint and judgment. I remembered standing there once with Micah, waiting outside while the preacher talked in circles about what kind of union God did or didn't recognize. He hadn't come outside to bless us. Micah never asked him to. I kept writing. Past the mercantile, where the shelves were always full, but hands reluctant to take my coin. Past the saloon, where I used to meet Micah on Fridays when he came in from the ridge, boots muddy and beard full of wind. Now the porch sat empty. Just a rocking chair creaking in the breeze and a man sweeping with his eyes low. I dismounted at the sheriff's station. The windows were fogged with dust and tobacco smoke. Inside, it smelled like spit and sweat and the slow rot of old power. Sheriff Kray didn't look up when I walked in. He sat at his desk like a judge in some backwoods courtroom, thick-necked, small-eyed, belt too tight over his gut. The badge on his chest was the only thing polished. I laid the deed on his desk without speaking. He glanced at it, then at me. He leaned back slowly, chewed his cheek, and smirked like the whole thing amused him. "You got nerve," he said. "It's legal," I told him. "Filed in Santa Fe, I just want what's mine." He picked up the paper, didn't read a word of it, and tore the bottom corner clean off with his thumb. "This says a lot of things," he said. "But what it don't say is that you belong." Before I could answer, he stood, faster than I expected for a man his size, and brought his hand across my face. The slap cracked through the room. My head hit the doorframe behind me, and the taste of iron filled my mouth. The paper floated to the floor. I didn't fall. I didn't cry. I straightened my shoulders and stood there, blood running warm down my lip, staring straight through him. Behind me, I could feel the stillness in the street. No gasps, no protest. Just boots scraping back against boardwalk. Just the wind and the flies. And then movement. I saw him from the corner of my eye, leaning off the hitch rail across the street. Long frame, dusty shirt rolled at the sleeves, jaw tight with something unreadable. Samuel Lark. I hadn't seen him in years. Not since before Micah died. He used to bring horses down from the northern range. Always kept his distance, always. Nodded when we passed like he saw more than he said. Sam walked forward now. No rush, no gun drawn. Just calm, solid steps across the dirt. He bent down beside me, picked up the torn deed from the ground, and brushed the blood off with the back of his hand like it was dust on a saddle. Then he handed it to me, wordless, steady. Our eyes met. I held that stare longer than I should have. There was no pity in him, no shock. Just a kind of steady quiet I hadn't felt in months. Maybe longer. Sheriff Kray made some noise behind us. A grunt, maybe, or a warning. Sam didn't flinch. Didn't even look at him. He turned, walked away, and disappeared around the corner without a word, but something stayed. In the stillness he left behind, something had shifted. Not in the town. Not in the sheriff. In me, because in a town full of silence, someone had looked back. By the time I reached the ridge, the sun had started bleeding into the hills. I sat still in the saddle for a minute, looking down at what was left of the cabin. It had once stood strong against prairie wind and mountain frost, but now the Roof sagged like a tired back and one shutter hung loose, flapping lazily in the breeze. The stone chimney still stood, though, blackened with soot and memory. That land was ours. Me and Micah, a place we fought for with sweat and calloused hands. And lost, first to the blizzard, then to silence, I dismounted slow, boots sinking, into dust-soft earth. I tied the reins to the old porch post, the same one Micah used to lean against when he whittled in the evening light. Funny how something so dead could still hold shape. The porch creaked under me. I pressed a hand to the door, crooked, cracked, held shut with a strip of old leather. I didn't even need to check. I knew it was his belt. Inside. It smelled of old ash, dry timber, and mold that had grown thick from rain slipping through. Broken shingles. But it was ours, still. I crossed the threshold and let the memories come. The hearth was dark, but I remembered the warmth it used to give. I remembered Micah's boots by the door, his deep laugh bouncing off the walls, the way he used to pull me close from behind while the stew boiled. None of that was left. Only the air remembered. I took off his coat and hung it on the same nail. Where he used to keep his rifle? It slumped there like a ghost. Then I opened the satchel I'd tied behind my saddle and pulled out the things that mattered: a folded quilt stitched by my mother's hands, a pouch of flint, and a braid of dried sage. I laid the quilt in the corner, right where our bed had once been. The colors had faded, but the pattern still held. I ran my fingers over the stitching, little crook diamonds, all of them slightly different. She used to say nothing sacred ever came out perfect. Outside, wind whispered through the broken boards. Inside, I crouched at the hearth and gathered what kindling I could find: pine needles, brittle bark, half a log that hadn't rotted through. I sparked it with flint. And breath and the part of me that still needed fire to survive. As the smoke curled into the chimney, I laid the sage braid across the windowsill. My grandmother used to say it warded off bad spirits. I wasn't sure I believed her, but some things you do just to feel connected. Just to pretend you're not alone in the room. I sat beside the fire on the floor, knees drawn to my chest, quilt pulled over my legs. My body ached in the way grief settles in joints when no one's around to see it. Micah had died 2 winters ago. Went out into a storm to fetch wood and didn't come back. I remember watching the sky close in, the color draining from the land, the sound of the wind swallowing up the cabin. I waited with 2 mugs ready, stew simmering low, thinking he'd walk through that door with snow in his beard and cold in his fingers, but the door never opened. 3 days later, a trader found him frozen by the stream, axe still gripped in. One hand, other arm curled around his chest like he was trying to hold something in. He died trying to warm us. That was Micah, always the one who carried too much. Always the one who left the fire burning. Our love wasn't loud. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. We lived slow, spoke quiet. And when we touched, it wasn't just skin, it was trust. I remember one night when the roof leaked and we dragged the mattress near the fire. He looked up at me and said, "When it's just you and me, this whole world's all right." No one knew us in town. Not the way we were behind closed doors. And that's how we kept it. Part safety, part shame, but it was ours. And that mattered. More than how anyone saw it. The fire snapped louder, pulling me back. I added another log and settled deeper into the quilt. Coyotes began calling out across the ridge. Their song rose and fell like breath, wild and ancient. Then I heard it. Not the howling, but something beneath it. A deeper silence. A thud. Hooves. I stood, slow, walked to the window, careful not to make noise, and there he was. High up on the hill. Above the cabin, Sam Lark, on horseback, still, watching. The moon cast a faint silver glow over him. His figure, sharp, upright. He wasn't moving, just sitting like he was carved into the land itself. Like part of him never left the saddle. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just stayed. Something nodded in my chest. Not fear, not quite, something else. He wasn't there for words. He never was. He was there to witness, to remind me I hadn't disappeared entirely. I watched him until the fire behind me cracked again. When I turned to look, just for a moment, it felt like someone had placed a hand on my shoulder. When I looked back through the window, he was gone, But the stillness he left behind didn't feel empty. It felt known. The storm came in from the north the next evening, thick and angry, like it had something to say to me. It started with the wind, slamming through the hollows, twisting branches into each other until the pines moaned. I braced the door with a beam and stuffed burlap into the gaps in the wall, but it didn't matter. Cold always found its way in, just like grief. Just like memory. The rain came after, sideways and fast, the kind that stings skin. Even when you're just stepping out for wood, I thought I could beat it. There was a pile of scrap behind the shed, leftover boards Micah never got around to using. I dragged a few toward the house, propped a ladder against the side, and climbed up with hammer in hand. But the second rung was cracked, and my boot slipped before I reached the roofline. I hit the ground hard. My side caught the corner of the log stack, and my stupid outstretched hand caught a rusted nail. It tore clean through my palm. The pain was immediate and white-hot. I didn't scream. I didn't move. Just lay there, blinking against the rain until it blurred into nothing. Eventually, I stood, pressed my bandana to the wound, stumbled back inside, soaked and shaking, blood seeping between my fingers. I sat against the wall near the hearth, tried to stoke the fire with my left hand. The wood was wet, and the flame took its time. Everything felt slow, heavy. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just listened to the storm scrape at the walls like it wanted in. And then a knock. At first, I thought it was the wind. But it came again. 1, 2, 3 slow raps against the door. Steady, certain. When I opened it, the storm came first, rain lashing sideways, wind curling around my legs and pulling at my shirt. And then Sam stepped through it. He was soaked to the bone. His coat clung to him like second skin, hat pulled low, a bundle of dry wood strapped to his back. Water dripped from his collar onto the floor. He didn't ask to come in. Just stepped inside like it was the most natural thing in. The world laid the bundle down by the fire and turned to look at me. His eyes landed on my hand. "You're hurt," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stone dragging across oak. I didn't bother lying. Just held my hand out, palm up. He moved closer without hesitation, knelt beside me, his boots dripping onto the floorboards. His fingers were warm as they gently unwound the blood-soaked bandana. He didn't flinch, didn't make a sound when he saw the wound. Just reached into the inner lining of his coat, tore a clean strip from his undershirt, and began wrapping my hand with slow, precise care. The fire popped behind us, casting soft gold across his face. The knot he tied wasn't tight, but it held. "You fall?" he asked finally. Ladder gave out. He nodded. No judgment. No questions. He stayed there for a moment, still holding my hand in his, thumb resting just above my wrist like he didn't want to let go too soon. Then he sat back against the opposite wall, rifle across his lap, legs stretched out. He looked like a man who'd done this 100 times. Waited out storms in stranger places. Trusted silence over small talk. I poured 2 tin cups of coffee from the pot I'd managed to keep hot, even with one good hand. I handed one to him. Our fingers almost touched, almost. We sat like that for a while, the storm drumming above us, the fire breathing low and quiet between us. The room smelled of wet wool, smoke, and something else I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Safety. He didn't ask why I stayed. I didn't ask why he came. Some men speak with action. Sam had always been one of them. Eventually, I lay down near the fire, wrapped back in my mother's quilt. I faced the flames, but I knew he was still there, watching, not intruding. His presence was like the fire itself, close enough to feel, never too close to burn. The rain softened sometime after midnight, but neither of us moved. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without waking. And when I did, just before dawn, I saw that he hadn't left. He was still sitting there, still watching the fire, like someone who knew how to guard the quiet things. After the storm, Sam kept coming back. At first, I thought it might have been a one-time kindness, a man doing what's decent in bad weather. But then, 2 mornings later, I opened the door to find a bundle of split wood stacked neatly on the porch, wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry. No note. No sound of retreating hooves, just presence. The next day, the loose hinge on the front door was fixed, quietly, cleanly. A day after that, the broken step on the porch was braced and reset. I hadn't even heard him come or go. Then one afternoon, I noticed a fresh horseshoe nailed to the beam by the gate, new iron. Unpolished, still smelling of forge and leather. He wasn't leaving messages. He was leaving promises. He'd ride in late sometimes, just past dusk. I'd be sitting on the porch with my boots off, quilt draped over my shoulders, fire crackling inside. He wouldn't say much. Just tie his horse to the post and sit on the rail like he was part of the wood. If I poured 2 mugs of coffee, he'd take one. If I didn't, he didn't ask. That was how we started speaking, without words, a hunting knife left on the table. Its leather sheath old but oiled, my father's. Rifle, still mounted above the hearth, untouched but not forgotten. A shawl I'd finally mended after 2 winters, the one Micah used to wrap around my shoulders when my hands were too numb to protest. Sam never asked about the shawl, or the rifle, or the quiet that lived in my bones, but he noticed one evening. Just as the light turned honey gold over the ridgeline, I unbraided my hair while sitting by the fire. I didn't mean to make it a moment. I just let it fall, long, black, streaked with silver and time. I caught him watching. Just once, his eyes lifted and fell like a tide, not greedy, not surprised. Just quiet, reverent, my mother used. To say hair holds memory, I said softly, not looking up. His voice came after a pause. Then you've carried a lifetime. I nodded, fingers still combing through the strands. Sometimes it feels like too much, he didn't argue. Didn't try to ease the weight. That's why I trusted him. Later that night, we sat on the porch while the wind rattled the grass low in the fields. He told me, not in full sentences, but in fragments, about a sister lost to fever, about land he worked but didn't own, about hands that built barns for other men's cattle, about silence, and how it grew roots inside you if you weren't careful. He never said the word lonely, but I heard it in every pause. He stood to leave just as the moon crested the hill. He didn't expect anything, didn't ask. But I went inside, pulled one of my heavier wool blankets from the cedar chest, and returned to the doorway. I didn't say a word, just held it out to him, folded and clean. He stepped up close, took it from my arms. His fingers brushed mine. Slow, warm, deliberate dote. Not by accident, he held my gaze for a breath longer than usual. Just long enough to be sure I saw him. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode off into the blue-shadowed dark. I stood at the doorway until the sound of hoofs faded. The rocking chair swayed behind me in the breeze. Empty, but not alone. Word travels faster in a town that's got nothing else to do but watch. By the end of that week, I knew eyes had turned toward the cabin again, not with pity this time, but suspicion. They saw the tracks of a second horse. The wood stacked neater the mended porch step. They saw 2 cups instead of 1. A man who wasn't mine riding east more often than his chores allowed, and the sheriff saw it most of all. I passed Horace Kray outside the general store on Thursday. He squinted at me like I owed him something, like silence had an expiration date. This time I didn't lower my gaze. I didn't smile either. I just kept walking, braid down my back, Micah's coat over my shoulders like armor. The next evening, Sam showed up after sundown. I heard the horse long before the knock, hooves slow, even, but heavy. The kind of weight you carry after doing something that made your ribs sore. When I opened the door, he stood there with his hat in his hand, lips split, dried blood on his collar, and the faintest swelling along his cheekbone. I stepped aside, without a word. He didn't say any either. Inside, I lit the lantern, fetched the water basin, and set it on the table. He sat in his usual place, near the hearth, back to the flames, rifle propped within arm's reach. His hands were calloused, knuckles scraped. When I pressed the warm cloth to his lip, he winced. Just barely. I didn't apologize. Sheriff? I asked. He nodded. You throw the first? No. Did you throw the last? He looked up, eyes steady but tired. Didn't need to. That was all we said about it. The fire cracked. The wind whispered through the gap beneath the door. I poured coffee, same as always. He held the cup like it might vanish if he didn't wrap every finger around it. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, just from everything else a man has to hold in. I sat across from him, placing my own mug down slow. Our knees didn't touch, but the space between us wasn't empty either. It held every word we hadn't said yet. "You don't owe me," I murmured. He didn't look up, just stared at the firelight dancing on the rim of his cup. A man don't need a debt to stand. That stayed in the air a long while, long enough for the fire to shift, long enough for the quiet to mean something. Outside, the coyotes called, 3 long howls, then silence. Inside, the world stayed still, warm, tentative. I watched him stretch his fingers near the flames. Watched him glance at my shawl draped over the rocking chair. I didn't move it. Let it be seen. Let him know it had a place here again. He finished the coffee but didn't stand. I didn't ask him to. Instead, I went to the cedar chest and pulled the same blanket I'd given him the week before. I laid it across the rocking chair, the old pine scent clinging to its seams. Without saying why, I smoothed the fabric once, slow like a promise. He saw it, but still, neither of us said what might have come next. It didn't feel needed. He stayed until the coals burned low and the lantern guttered once, then rose gently and walked to the door. "I'll ride by tomorrow," he said, voice rough with something he hadn't named yet. I nodded. "I'll leave the gate unlatched." That night, the wind shifted, and for the first time since I'd come home, I didn't hear the cabin creak. A letter arrived the following week, delivered by a boy with boots too big for his feet and a bandage across his chin. It came stamped with a seal from the capital, the kind of parchment folks in Ashridge weren't used to seeing. Clara opened it slowly, fingertips rough against the edge. The deed was hers, signed, certified, sealed. She read it twice. Then a third time, sitting on the porch with the shawl across her lap and the wind brushing her braid like a mother's hand. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, but quiet in Ashridge never lasted long. They came the next morning, the sheriff and 3 of his deputies, all thick with drink and arrogance. Horace Kray held a new paper, crumpled and creased. A forged writ, his boots dragged mud across her step. One man carried a torch. "Another a jug of oil? We'll burn you out, Redhawk," Kray hissed. "That land don't belong to your kind." But he didn't see Sam standing behind the barn, not until the ranch hand stepped from shadow, rifle loaded. Stance low, eyes sharp as the frost biting the edge of morning. Sam didn't speak. Didn't shout. He just stood there, boots planted. Rifle pointed at the dirt, but it was enough, because one by one, others stepped forward too. The blacksmith from the edge of town, grease still on his hands. The young schoolteacher, her sleeves rolled up and eyes steady. Even old Mrs. Winslow from the church, carrying a kettle of coffee like it was the gospel itself. No one held a weapon but Sam, but they didn't have to. The silence said it all. "You're done," the sheriff's mouth twisted, but the fight had drained from him. He looked at Clara like she'd hexed the town, then spat into the dust. "You'll regret this," he growled, climbing into his saddle, but no one moved, not to help, not to follow. Kray and his men turned, riding off toward the edge of the horizon. Not wounded, not broken, but seen for what they were. And for a man like that, being seen was worse than being buried. Clara stood in the cabin doorway, the deed in one hand, her other pressed lightly against the doorframe. Her breath trembled. Once, but her spine did not. Sam didn't enter. Just waited outside until the last hoofbeat faded, then looked up at her with that same unspoken steadiness. She stepped forward, letting the shawl fall from her shoulders. "I don't need saving," she said, voice rough with memory. "But I am meant to live invisible." He nodded once. "You never were." Later that afternoon, she relit the fire in the hearth, not because it was cold, but because it belonged to her now. The flames danced against the tin cup on the wall, the rifle on the mantel, the quilt on the bed. Every item whispered home when Sam reached for his saddle. She didn't stop him, but she didn't look away either. "I'll ride with you," she said, surprising them both. No need to say where. They saddled 2 horses side by side. No kiss, no promise. Just wind in their hair and distance ahead. They rode slow, Dust curling around their boots, the land stretched wide and open, not toward fantasy. Not toward marriage, but toward dignity and shared silence, beneath a sky that was finally blue.